Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. There are some things that, once you hear them, you can never unhear. They replay in your mind at the worst moments, poison every kiss, and make you question everything you thought you knew about your life. My name is Ryan, and this is how words from my wife ended our 8-year marriage before she even knew I was listening. After being married for 8 years, Jessica and I had hit that phase where things naturally start to slow down. The passionate romance of our early 20s had settled into something more comfortable and predictable. We had our routines, our separate interests, our quiet evenings at home. At first, I didn't think much of it. Everyone says marriage goes through phases, right? The constant excitement and butterflies can't last forever. I figured we were just transitioning into a more mature kind of love, the kind that builds families and lasts decades. Jessica seemed content enough with our life together, even if she wasn't as affectionate as she used to be. But when I started trying to reignite some of that old spark between us, suggesting romantic weekend getaways, new restaurants to try, and activities we could do together, Jessica's lack of enthusiasm became harder to ignore. She'd agree to my suggestions half-heartedly, go through the motions during our date nights, and seem distracted even when we were having what should have been intimate moments. I kept suggesting different things, thinking maybe I just hadn't found the right activity or the right approach. Maybe she wanted adventure, so I planned hiking trips. Maybe she wanted culture, so I got theater tickets. Maybe she wanted relaxation, so I booked spa weekends. But nothing seemed to spark any genuine excitement or interest from her. Jessica would smile and say yes to my suggestions, but there was something missing in her responses. The enthusiasm felt forced, like she was participating out of obligation rather than a genuine desire to spend time with me. During our romantic dinners, she'd be polite but distant. On our weekend trips, she'd take photos for social media, but seemed to be going through the motions. I started planning more elaborate surprises, thinking that maybe I just needed to try harder. I arranged for flowers to be delivered to her office, planned surprise picnics in places that had been meaningful to us early in our relationship, and even tried recreating our first date down to the smallest details. But Jessica's reactions remained lukewarm at best. As time went by and my efforts continued to fall flat, I began paying closer attention to everything Jessica did and said. I started noticing patterns that I'd been unconsciously overlooking for months, maybe even years. The changes had been so gradual that I'd adapted to them without really processing what they meant. I wasn't blind to what was happening, even though I desperately wanted to be. I'd been noticing things that made me uncomfortable, but that I kept pushing to the back of my mind because dealing with them felt scarier than pretending everything was fine. Jessica had become significantly colder in bed, with our physical intimacy drying up to almost nothing. We went from making love several times a week to maybe once or twice a month, and even then it felt mechanical and disconnected. She'd participate, but without the passion or enthusiasm that had once made our physical relationship so satisfying. Even the casual physical affection had disappeared. Those small gestures had gradually stopped happening. When I tried to initiate them, Jessica would respond, but the hugs felt obligatory, like something she was doing out of habit rather than genuine affection. She started taking any free opportunity she had to spend more time with her girls, but she never shared details about where they went or what they did. These girls' nights became more frequent, sometimes twice a week, and Jessica would come home later and later, often after I'd already gone to bed. When I'd ask about her nights out the next morning, Jessica would give vague answers without mentioning specific places, conversations, or even which friends had been there. These outings seemed to energize Jessica in ways that our time together didn't. She'd come home in good moods and seeming more alive than I'd seen her in months. It was painful to realize that spending time away from me made my wife happier than spending time with me. When Jessica was eventually at home with me, her phone became a constant barrier between us. It was always face down on whatever surface she'd placed it on, and she'd immediately grab it when it buzzed. She'd angle the screen away from me when typing responses, or she'd take the phone into another room to answer calls. If I happened to be nearby when Jessica was texting, she'd stop mid-message and wait until I left the room. The secrecy around her phone communications was obvious and hurtful, but I didn't know how to address it without seeming controlling or paranoid. All of these behaviors individually could be explained away, but together they painted a picture that I was terrified to acknowledge. I kept pushing these thoughts away because confronting them felt scarier than continuing to live in denial. What if I was right about what these signs meant? What if Jessica was already emotionally checked out of our marriage? What if there was someone else? The possibility of having to face any of those realities felt overwhelming. So instead of addressing my concerns directly, I began burying myself in work to kill time and avoid thinking about what was happening at home. This meant that I started staying longer at the office, volunteering for extra projects, and finding reasons to work late even when I didn't need to. Working late became my way of avoiding the painful reality of coming home to a wife who seemed increasingly uninterested in spending time with me. If I stayed at the office until 8 or 9 p.m., I could come home, eat a quick dinner, and go to bed without having to navigate the awkward conversation and forced intimacy that had become our evening routine. But even while I was avoiding confrontation, I still felt like I could just show Jessica enough care by doing thoughtful things. She would realize how much she meant to me, and things between us would get better. I convinced myself that her distance was temporary, and that the right gesture or surprise would remind her why she'd fallen in love with me in the first place. I thought that if I could just be thoughtful and considerate enough, Jessica would remember why we'd gotten married and would want to reconnect with me. When none of these small gestures seemed to make any difference, I decided to try something bigger. I spent weeks learning how to cook Jessica's favorite dish from scratch, a complex Italian pasta recipe that her grandmother had taught her years ago, but that she rarely made anymore because it was so time-consuming. I watched YouTube videos to understand the technique, and even joined food cooking groups for tips on getting the sauce just right. I was planning to surprise Jessica with this meal as a way of showing her that I paid attention to what mattered to her. And this gesture would probably create room for us to have a real talk about our situation. I decided Thursday evening would be perfect. I had decided to leave work early so I could stop by the grocery store, get all the ingredients, and have everything before our time for dinner. I was excited about my plan and felt more hopeful about our relationship than I had in months. I imagined her face lighting up when she realized what I'd done, and I pictured us having the kind of intimate, connected evening we hadn't shared in far too long. When I got to our house around 5:30 p.m., I was carrying grocery bags. I let myself in through the front door as quietly as possible because I wanted to maintain the element of surprise. I put my keys on the counter and left my shoes by the door, planning to get straight to work in the kitchen. From the hallway leading to our bedroom, I could hear Jessica's voice. She was clearly on the phone with someone. I paused in the hallway, not wanting to interrupt her call, but also curious about what she was talking about. That's when I heard her say the words that would replay in my mind for months afterward. I can't keep pretending much longer. He's a good guy, but he's just not enough. Honestly, I feel dead inside when I'm with him, she said. For a split second, I thought there was no way she could be talking about me. Maybe she was discussing a friend's relationship or a coworker situation. My brain refused to process that my wife was describing our marriage and her feelings about me in such devastating terms. But then Jessica said my name. She said, "Ryan tries so hard, but it doesn't matter. I just don't feel anything anymore when he touches me or when he tries to be romantic. I know I should end it, but it's complicated, you know? We have the house, our families love him, and he hasn't actually done anything wrong." The grocery bags suddenly felt impossibly heavy in my hands. My chest felt like it was caving in. Most people think they'd explode in a moment like that, storm into the room, demand an explanation, or start shouting about betrayal and lies. But the reality of shock is that it makes you go completely quiet. Your body shuts down all the non-essential functions and focuses entirely on just processing what you've heard. I could hear Jessica's voice continuing her conversation in the bedroom, but I couldn't focus on her words anymore. I realized that I didn't want Jessica to know I was there because I couldn't face her in that moment, couldn't pretend that everything was normal, and couldn't have the conversation that would inevitably follow if she discovered I'd been listening. I needed time to process what I'd heard before I could figure out how to respond. So I quietly put my keys back in my pocket, left the grocery bags and my briefcase where I set them down, and back toward the front door. I managed to get outside without making any noise. I stood on our front porch for a moment, lost in thought. I'd been trying so hard to show Jessica how much I loved her, not realizing that she felt dead inside when she was with me. A couple of minutes after I'd left the house, Jessica probably finished her phone call and discovered the grocery bags and my briefcase sitting in the hallway. She must have realized that I'd come home and then left again without saying anything, which probably seemed strange enough to warrant checking on me. She sent me a text message asking where I was and mentioning the groceries in the hallway. The message read, "Hey, babe, I saw the grocery bags by the door. Where did you go?" I read the message immediately, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. How do you reply to someone who's asking if you're okay when you've just overheard them describing your presence as something they have to pretend to tolerate? How do you act normal with someone who's just told a friend that they feel dead inside when you touch them? After about an hour of not hearing back from me, Jessica began calling. I could see her name on my phone screen, but I couldn't answer. I wasn't ready to hear her voice or to have a conversation that would require me to pretend I didn't know how she really felt about our marriage. I spent that Thursday night at my friend's house. He could tell something was seriously wrong, but I wasn't ready to talk about what I'd heard. I told him that Jessica and I had had a fight and that I needed a place to stay for the night. He offered me his guest room and didn't push for details. Throughout the evening, Jessica kept blowing up my phone with texts and calls. She had no idea what might be wrong or why I wasn't responding to her messages. Her texts became increasingly concerned and frustrated. "Ryan, please call me back. I'm worried about you. This isn't like you to just disappear. What's going on? Can you at least let me know you're safe?" The fact that Jessica was acting innocent and concerned made the whole situation even more painful. She was genuinely worried about my well-being while simultaneously describing our marriage as something she could barely tolerate. The disconnect between her public concern and her private feelings was devastating. I didn't reply to any of her messages that night, not because I was trying to be strong or to punish her, but because I literally had no words. I lay awake all night, wondering what comes next. By the next morning, I knew I had to say something to Jessica, but I didn't know how to handle the conversation. I needed her to know that I'd heard her, but I also needed to protect myself from further hurt. So I finally sent a text message that was short and to the point. "I heard everything you said about me and our marriage. I'm done." I didn't elaborate or explain what I'd heard or when I'd heard it. I just wanted Jessica to know that I knew the truth about how she felt. Jessica's response was immediate and panicked. She went into full damage control mode, sending me a series of messages trying to minimize what she'd said and convince me that I'd misunderstood. She claimed that she'd just been venting to her friend and that her words didn't reflect her true feelings about our marriage. "Babe, it's not what you think," she texted. "I was just having a bad day and saying things I didn't mean. Please come home so we can talk about this." Then, "You're overreacting by ignoring me yesterday. I say stupid things when I'm frustrated, but you know I love you." Jessica's attempts to downplay what she'd said only made things worse. The idea that describing our marriage as something she had to pretend to tolerate was just venting was insulting to my intelligence. And the suggestion that I was overreacting to learning that my wife felt dead inside when I touched her made me angry in a way I hadn't expected. But the mix of our 8-year history together, the love I still felt for Jessica despite what I'd heard, and the shock of the whole situation made me consider at least listening to what she had to say. Maybe there was some explanation that would make sense of everything. Maybe I'd misunderstood the context of her conversation. Against my better judgment, I decided to go home and let Jessica talk. I told myself that I owed it to our marriage to at least hear her side of the story before making any permanent decisions. We'd been together for 8 years. Surely that deserved more than a text message breakup based on one overheard conversation. When I got home Friday evening, Jessica was waiting for me with what seemed like a prepared speech. She apologized for what I'd heard and tried to explain that she'd been going through a difficult time, not understanding herself emotionally. But the things she said didn't reflect her true feelings about our relationship. Her excuses sounded convincing, as she claimed she was in a phase of finding herself and figuring out what she wanted from life, but that she did love me and wanted to work on our marriage. She said that the distance between us had been her way of dealing with some personal issues, and that she hadn't meant to shut me out or make me feel unwanted. Jessica talked about how marriage was hard work and that everyone went through periods of feeling disconnected from their spouse. She said that her conversation with her friend had been her way of processing those feelings, not a reflection of her actual intentions about our relationship. During our conversation, I told Jessica about my fear that she might be cheating on me with another man. I explained that her secretive behavior, her lack of interest in physical intimacy, and her frequent nights out with friends had made me worry that there was someone else in her life. Jessica promised that nothing like that would happen and that there was no other man. She swore that her girls' nights were just her way of having some independence within our marriage. She said that she understood why her behavior had made me suspicious, but that she'd never been unfaithful to me. By the end of our conversation, I felt somewhat reassured. Jessica's explanations weren't perfect, but they were reasonable enough to give me hope that we could work through our problems. We agreed to try harder to communicate with each other and to make our marriage a priority. That night, we even made love for the first time in weeks. But it didn't feel like it used to. I couldn't stop thinking about her words about feeling dead inside when I touched her. Every kiss and caress felt forced and artificial, like we were both going through the motions again rather than expressing genuine desire for each other. In the days and weeks that followed, I tried to forgive Jessica and move forward with our marriage. But the words I'd heard that evening never left my head. They played on repeat during every conversation, every meal we shared, and every attempt at intimacy. Every kiss felt fake because I kept wondering if Jessica was pretending to enjoy it. Every romantic gesture I made felt hollow because I knew she thought I wasn't enough for her. Every time she smiled at me or said she loved me, I questioned whether she was just continuing to pretend until she figured out how to end our marriage. I found myself analyzing everything Jessica said and did, looking for signs that she was still feeling the way she described to her friend. When she was affectionate, I wondered if she was forcing it. When she seemed distant, I assumed it was her true feelings showing through. I couldn't win either way. The trust that had been the foundation of our marriage was completely shattered. I now knew that her entire demeanor toward me had been a performance. Within a few months of trying to make our marriage work, I realized that it wasn't going to be possible. The words I'd overheard had fundamentally changed how I saw our relationship, and no amount of effort on either of our parts was going to erase what I knew about Jessica's true feelings. I couldn't continue living with someone who saw loving me as an obligation rather than a joy. I couldn't keep trying to romance someone who had described my touch as something that made her feel dead inside. And I couldn't build a future with someone who thought I would never be enough for her. So I made the decision to file for divorce. I got in touch with an attorney, and she helped me prepare the paperwork and advised me on how to protect my interests during the divorce process. I decided to serve Jessica with the divorce papers while she was away for the weekend, visiting her sister. I left the documents on our kitchen table, where she'd be sure to see them as soon as she got home, and then moved out of the house again, this time with no hope of coming back. Along with the divorce papers, I left a note instructing Jessica to communicate with my lawyer if she needed anything from me. I made it clear that I didn't want to have any direct contact with her during the divorce process because I knew that talking to her would only make the situation more difficult and emotional. When Jessica found the papers when she came back, she tried desperately to convince me to reconsider. She called and texted constantly, asking if we could try marriage therapy or take a break instead of getting divorced. She promised again that there was no other man and that she was willing to do whatever it took to save our marriage. But my mind was made up. I'd heard Jessica's true feelings about our marriage in her own words, and no amount of therapy or promises was going to change what she'd said or how it had made me feel. Some things can't be unsaid or taken back, and her description of feeling dead inside when she was with me was one of those things. The divorce proceedings took longer than I'd expected, especially the asset division portion. Jessica and I seemed to disagree over little things frequently, which made every aspect of the process more complicated and time-consuming. She wanted to keep the house, but couldn't afford to buy out my share. I wanted to sell everything and split the proceeds, but she was emotionally attached to our home. Eventually, we reached a settlement where I forfeited my claim to the house in exchange for other assets. It wasn't the most financially advantageous arrangement for me, but it allowed us to finalize the divorce and move on with our separate lives. Looking back on the whole experience, I'm grateful that I overheard Jessica's conversation that evening. As painful as it was to learn the truth about her feelings, it saved me from years of trying to fix a marriage that was already over in her mind. I could have spent months or even years working on our relationship while she was just going through the motions and waiting for the right time to leave. The hardest part wasn't discovering that my wife didn't love me anymore. It was realizing that she'd been pretending for so long. The woman I'd been living with, sleeping next to, and trying to romance hadn't been my wife at all. She'd been an actress playing the role of a loving spouse while feeling nothing but obligation and resentment. Today, I'm rebuilding my life and learning to trust my instincts about relationships again. I'm more aware of the signs that someone is emotionally checked out, and I'm better at having difficult conversations before problems become insurmountable. Most importantly, I know that I deserve to be with someone who doesn't have to pretend to love me. Sometimes the most devastating revelations come not from what people do, but from what they say when they think no one is listening. Jessica's words that evening revealed more about the state of our marriage than any argument or counseling session ever could have. And while it was painful to hear, it gave me the clarity I needed to make the decision that was best for both of us. The grocery bags I dropped in our hallway that Thursday evening were supposed to be the beginning of a romantic surprise that would bring us closer together. Instead, they became the evidence that I'd been home to hear the truth about my marriage. Sometimes life has a way of showing you exactly what you need to see, even when you're not ready to see it. I learned that it's better to face a painful truth than to live a comfortable lie. Jessica and I were both pretending that our marriage was something it wasn't, but only one of us knew we were pretending. The kindest thing she ever did for me was to tell her friend the truth about how she felt, even though she had no idea I was listening. Some words can't be taken back, some feelings can't be unfelt, and some marriages can't be saved once the truth is spoken aloud. But sometimes that's exactly what needs to happen for everyone involved to find their way to something real and genuine. Jessica gave me the gift of knowing where I stood, even though she never meant to give me that gift at all.